Hey there, welcome back to the podcast. I hope you're having a wonderful day. It's me, Jody Ann, and this is the witching half hour or so. I'm doing a series on the elements. They are a fundamental building block of witchcraft. I find that every few years, I kind of revisit my relationship with the elements. So for the podcast, I wanted to revisit them. We're going to go through the 4 elements: earth, air, water, fire. We're going to break down a little bit of what it's like to work with them, some of what I think of as like the personalities of each of these. I think of them that way because it helps me understand the energy behind them. I feel that every time we deepen our understanding of these 4 building blocks of spell work, that we really level up all of our workings. And the elements, they are everywhere, right? We find them in the tarot. We find them in astrology. They're in the tree of life. They are just everywhere. They're in the casting of our circle. Anytime we're working with nature, anytime we're in flow, in the seasons, they come up in all of them. That's why I am doing this series. I'm going to be sharing my experience with you. For each element, I'm going to write either a meditation or a exercise that you can do. The way to get those is to go to my website, jodyannpsychicmedium.com, and sign up for my monthly love letter. It's called A Little Bit of Magic, and I'm going to be putting those exercises and meditations in there. That way it'll give me some space to kind of like work on the podcast and everything I'm doing and not have it all like have to be ready at the exact same time. The love letter is a monthly love letter. It's to encourage you. It is not a sales email. I will only sell to you with your permission. So occasionally you will get the opportunity to opt into or out of a launch I'm doing. But for now, it's just telling you what's happening on the podcast, and it's going to offer you these meditations and some encouragement on your path. Okay? So sign up to the newsletter if you want those. And yeah, we are going to dive into the elements now. I'm starting this series with water. Many of you will know that this makes perfect sense for me to start at. First off, I'm obsessed with water. We know this. If you've ever been on my Instagram, which is at sprite.made.soap, it's full of pictures of me out on my paddleboard, out at beaches, out in the water. I have been doing a lot of work with the element of water for personal healing and growth. More healing though. I've been doing a lot of work with water for emotional healing and emotional transformation over the past few years. So that's where I'm going to start this dive. And actually, like, the whole idea for this series came from me walking along the beach with a friend of mine. Now, it's taken me a while to get this all together, but the idea of doing a look at the element of water and how powerful it is and some of the ideas behind it came to me while walking on the beach in the morning, sipping my coffee in one of the most beautiful places in the world that I am blessed enough to spend time. Our elements are often talked about as masculine and feminine or active and passive. And there's this real idea in our collective conscience that water is this beautiful, flowy, sweet, loving, nurturing element. And that is true. And also, water is a very powerful force. So it is both. Most of us think of the idea in metaphysical and healing circles, you hear that water finds the easiest way to go with the flow. And that's very true. Water does find the path of least resistance down a mountain. But if you've ever looked at a waterfall, that is not necessarily the easiest way down the mountain. It is just the path of least resistance. Waterfalls can be immensely powerful, roaring, thundering, eddy-making, churning, can drown you devices of nature. They're still amazing and beautiful, and I love chasing them. In this episode, though, I really want to make sure we're talking about all the aspects of water, not just this watered down version of water where it's sweet and cleansing and purifying, because water is also deep and it represents our subconscious, and there is a lot of very heavy emotional work that goes through clearing some of the things that we sometimes need to clear in our healing work. All of the elements have regular correspondences. With water in our sacred circle, when we're doing the lesser banishing ritual, water is placed in the west. So water corresponds to the west, and it corresponds to the Archangel Gabriel because Gabriel stands in the west. Water also has deep associations with the subconscious mind. So you want to think about that when you're looking at a lake or any body of water. There's what you see, and then there's what's underneath. So that association is pretty straightforward. I find the associations that water has in our culture are very straightforward. It makes sense that we associate water with emotion because we have tears. Our tears are made of water. They're like the salt. We often think of our emotions as something that ebb and flow and come in and out like the tides. Everything will flow in and everything will flow out. If you just witness it, your emotions will move and do what they're supposed to do, just like the tides. There's a lot of healing associations around water. Again, super makes sense, right? We wash wounds, we wash our food, we use water to clean. And this actually goes to the properties of the molecule of water. I find this so mind-blowing. So like we, as ancient people, we knew that water was purifying. And then now in our modern times, we know that because water is slightly polarized, the molecule itself, H2O, has a polarizing effect because of its ionic bonds, that it actually uses that to cleanse, right? It grabs dirt away and other molecules with its ionic properties. That's probably a little weird and deep, right? Okay, that's a weird digression. Let's get back to witchcraft. Throughout this episode, as we talk about water, I want you to try and remember the power of water as well as the beauty of this element. I don't want us to romanticize this element and focus only on how it relates to love and creativity and nurturing. I want to take a real look at water and this element as an expansive view. I want us to recognize that within nature, floods are something that change the landscape, and our own waters inside us, when we overflow and are overwhelmed and we're in a transformative space, also changes our internal landscapes. The way we see water work upon nature is how we can actually work on water within ourselves. So we can look to water as this element that represents our emotion and our creativity, but we want to include all aspects of it. One of the things that water is closely associated with, and as we look at some water goddesses in a bit, because I've got some researched for you lovies, is the mother aspect of the goddess. It's associated with nurturing and healing and the mother, and that is because of the waters of childbirth. Right? We have the amniotic fluids that our babies grow in. We have the flow of milk when we're lactating. We have the flow that we have every month. So all of these aspects tie into a woman's cycle, right? The moon moves our tides, and it's on the same calendar as our cycles. So it makes sense that we're associating femininity, creation, and birthing with water. And any of you in the Earbud Coven who have been at a birth, whether assisting someone or experiencing it as a birthing person, know that this is a hugely emotional and transformative process. So when we talk about the transformations of water, I want us to think about that idea of how we rebirth ourselves, and we are birthing through creativity and the water associated with that. Birthing is an incredibly powerful process. So we have those correspondences with childbirth and birthing, and we can take that and pull that out where water is also associated with creativity as a whole, right? There's the science behind that, where we do believe that all of life came out of the ocean. That's where we all started in the Darwin themes of everything, and in the evolutionary themes, everything came out of the waters of the ocean. And a lot of our indigenous people, their lore talks about the ocean being a source of life as well. Now, the bigger kind of abstract idea as we look at the subconscious that is associated with water, creativity comes from the creation aspect and tying in the birthing. So every time we birth a new idea, every time we birth a creative project, every time out of us we bring forth something new and creative, that's the element of water working in our lives. I often associate the element of water with the sacral chakra, that orange one around our belly button, because it hovers above our womb when we're a female person. It hovers around our womb. That's our creative center. And I associate it with water because I associate creativity and art and music and creation with water. I'm just going to touch a bit on the planetary ones, the planetary correspondences. Obviously the moon, right? Because she connects with the water on our planet, creating our tides, as we mentioned. And Neptune, of course, is associated with water. It's named after a sea god, after all. And that leads us quickly to astrology, right? So the 3 astrological water signs are Pisces, Cancer, and Scorpio. Okay, so I think that's good for correspondences. Those are the main ones that came to mind when I was writing this episode. I probably have missed some. So thinking about water, I have been working with water very closely for a number of years. It was not an element I was comfortable with for a long time. Most of my 20s, I did not work with water. And in through my 30s, I started working with water more. When I was doing meditation, when I was doing shamanic training, water came up and started inviting me to work with it. Now remember, I think of the elements as personalities. That helps me as a witch when I'm working and creating spells and writing spells. So I think of them as personalities in and of themselves. And I try to gauge if I'm going to be working with the healing aspect, the deep aspect, the flowy aspect. I look at what's going on in my life, what kind of spell work I want to do, and what aspect of water I want to work with, if it even fits. A lot of what I've been doing in the past 4 years has really been karmatic clearing and deep family pattern healing, chain breaking style work, and examining some of my old patterns. So that work has been really, really good to do water healing with. It's not always gentle work, right? Like I said, water is really transformative. Like a flood can change the landscape. When we had these atmospheric rivers rip through BC, it decimated our highways and it uprooted these big, beautiful, like huge cedar trees, and things changed drastically in these storms. When we have these storms come up in our life, I find using meditation to tune into the storm, to lean into it, to allow the storm in our life to be a bit of a storm. And of course, I'm talking figuratively here. I'm talking about our emotional storms when we are overwhelmed. Maybe there's tears, maybe there's anger, maybe there's grief, maybe there's remorse. And we need to allow those to surface and flow in and out like the waves. One of the ways I have used water, well, obviously paddling. You guys know I'm out on my paddleboard, and I will write out what I'm struggling with. And I will do a ceremony right on the water on my paddleboard. And I will write out what I am overwhelmed with, and I will give it to the water. I will write out what I want to release, and I will give it to the water. Sometimes I will just bring offerings of flower petals that represent what I want to release. And it does the connective thing for me when I physically give it to the water. I'm using that energetic correspondence of healing. I'm tapping into those deep waters of transformation and healing. I'm tapping into that mother aspect of water so that I'm supporting my inner child work and my self-nurturing work. And I'm doing a physical ritual that helps my monkey brain remember the work I'm doing. And I'm bringing all those correspondences with it. Maybe you're not living near water like I do. Like I live in the West Coast, so I can drive to the Pacific Ocean in 20 minutes over in Belcarra, and there's a beautiful lake I spend a lot of time at, and there's multiple rivers around my home, so I can even do a burning ceremony safely down by a river, which I have done. So if you are living somewhere where you don't have direct access to beautiful bodies of water, all water is elemental water. So if you're living in a skyrise apartment in an urban center and you don't have ready access to the ocean, the water coming out of your tap in a bowl works. You can do all your journaling work in your house. You can write it all down, rip it into a million pieces, put it in the bowl of water, give it to the water, and just flush it. Your toilet will lead to the ocean eventually. And when you make the energetic connection that the water in your house and the water in your taps is the elemental water, period. Even the rain coming down is the water. I didn't always think like this, and that's why I share it with you. It took me a number of years of working spell work to really, really solidify the idea that all water is the ocean. And that shifted and changed how powerful the work I do is. Like, for instance, a lot of us take water and we put it on our altar, and we think of it as our altar water, and we think of it as our altar water. Start working with the idea that that's not just your altar water, that is the ocean on your altar, or that is the rivers of the world on your altar. That is the representation of water goddesses on your altar. It levels up your spell work when you bring that higher level of thought pattern to the work you're doing, when you're connecting your altar space and your work with the actual universe outside of your home. I hope that makes sense. Now, a lot of my practice is centered around goddess worship, right? I invoke different goddesses. Because I am a practicing witch and I am an eclectic style pagan, I work with different deities when I'm doing spell work. So I wanted to give you guys some resources of some of the goddesses associated with water. Probably one of the more popular and well-known goddesses that is associated with water is Aphrodite. She is a Greek goddess of love and beauty. And her origin story is that she rose out of the sea foam. So she's a daughter of Zeus, and she rose out of the sea foam. And that is how she was born. And she just rose out of the foam in her stately, gorgeous beauty. When you're working with water and you are invoking some of the more loving and nurturing, soft aspects of the water, Aphrodite is a beautiful goddess to invoke and work with. Another very supportive and loving goddess that I will work with in water rituals and invoke is Oshun. Now, she is a Pacific goddess, is Oshun. Now, I invoke her when I am in the Pacific Ocean quite a bit. I reach out to Oshun, although originally she is not an ocean goddess. She's a river water goddess. She comes out of West Africa, and there's actually a river named for her, the Ocean River, in Nigeria. She has been adopted and worshipped through most Afro-Brazilian regions, and she was introduced to me actually by a songstress, a woman named Heather Houston. She does beautiful choir work and really beautiful choir and singing and sacred song work. And she has songs to Oshun. And it was through these evoking songs that I was introduced to this goddess. She has become very close to my heart. She's one of my favorite to invoke. What I found interesting is researching her is the idea that she lives in pure and fresh waters, rivers and waterfalls mainly. She is a goddess of divinity, so she is a seer. She rules over feminine fertility, beauty, and love. And she's associated with the colors white, yellow, and gold. So I found it really interesting that Oshun is mostly associated with pure water, because here in Canada, we have so much fresh water. So I thought it really interesting that I find her in the rivers, and a lot of the water around me is quite brackish. It's not always pure seawater. It's brackish water in the Fraser River. There's a lot of fresh water in the rivers around here. I also found out in doing a real deep dive into her background that she receives prayers of the pregnant women for protection, and she protects small children, and affectionately they call her Mame. And so many of her devotees don't even refer to her as Oshun, they refer to her as Mame or Mame Oshun. And I will put her information that I found in the show notes for you guys, along with a write-up on Aphrodite. And then one of the things, another goddess I do really love, a girlfriend of mine works really closely with her. She's a Polynesian water goddess, and her name is Anatua. She is very much a mother goddess. She's very nurturing and loving as well. Next time we have Lazina on, maybe we'll talk to her about Anatua. And there are a lot of different goddesses. I did want to mention, when I am out in the Pacific waters, I find it interesting because many of the goddesses you look up around water deities, they are warm water goddesses. But there is a beautiful energy in our cold Pacific Ocean. I don't know the name of the goddess that does seem to have her energy in those waters. She's definitely a mother goddess. Everything I've looked up, though, in our First Nation stories, they all talk of a sad goddess. Her name is Sedna. She was shunned to the bottom of the ocean there's different stories, and her fingers were cut off, and she will trap animals in her hair until she's given offerings to release them to the fishers. And I haven't found that sad style of energy out in the ocean. So I'm hoping to find stories. I've been looking for quite a few years for a story of a Pacific cold water deity that is loving. The mythology I'm finding and the stories I'm finding around her just don't elevate her and her stories. So I'm unsatisfied with those stories. If any of you beauties in my earbud coven have other information for me, please, because I spend a lot of time in the Pacific Ocean, and the feeling is of a loving, compassionate mother. And I mean, she will slap you if you're out of line. She doesn't suffer fools, this goddess who's out there and who plays in our tide pools with us. But I don't find her to be malicious or desperate like the stories I'm reading. Even the Norse goddess who is married to the Jotun, her name is, I think is it Ran? Ran, who would be a cold water deity. Ran, she is supposed to be the personification of the sea. Her big claim to fame, again, is a net that will trap you and pull you down and under. So I'm interested in and still searching for a legend that fits the energy I find when I am out paddling. Because I have put in December in Willows Bay Beach off the coast of Victoria in cold, drizzly rain and been gifted a whale to watch it spout. So I just haven't experienced this cold, clawing entity. I experience when I'm out on the water a loving, compassionate, encompassing mother that will hold all of your worries and remind you of the slivers of light and the beautiful silvers around all of the clouds. I think that's where I'm going to end the podcast. I think that's where I'll end it. I'm going to remind you guys all to head over to the show notes on my webpage. That's jodiannepsychicmedium.com. I will be putting out a water meditation. It's going to be very deep. It's a deep water meditation for healing. When it came through and I wrote it, it was quite, it's for those of you doing deep work. It's not a fluffy bunny style meditation. It will be available. I'll either link to it in the show notes or I'm going to send it out I think I'm sending it out in the monthly love letter. I think that's how I'm going to work these. So please sign up to the monthly love letter, Little Bit of Magic. There is a link to do that on my webpage. Okay, brightest blessings to you all, and I can't wait to see you on the next witching half hour or so. So, again, okay, so now what am I going to do? I'm going to look at my notes here. I hope that makes sense. So, think about this. Some of the other, really, what else do I have? What else? Now, want to mention, so there